So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've talked almost exclusively about abortion and related issues in last night and today. We're going to shift over to doctor-assisted suicide, which is a critical issue right now. So I bring you Maria McFadden Maffucci. God bless you.
Thank you, Chris, for that wonderful introduction, because my first task was to tell you who I am, and you did a great job of that. The Human Life Foundation was created by my late father in New York City in 1975. So first of all, I just want to say Governor Cuomo, who said pro-lifers aren't welcome in New York. Not only are we welcome, we've been here a long time, we're not leaving, and I welcome all of you too. In addition to the quarterly journal, we've also, since our inception, had a program for pregnancy centers to offer them matching grants. And now, because of Governor Cuomo's horrible RHA, we also have an initiative to try to get people in New York together to defend pregnancy centers, like the lovely lady from Bridge to Life is here, because he is, Governor Cuomo is, there's legislation that will be coming down the line to try to attack and close pregnancy centers as well. So as Chris said, we have a special offer here. On the other side, I have something from our website. So in addition, let me just say, the free year digital subscription that you would get also entitles you to our entire archive since 1975, which are all online. It's a wonderful research tool. You can look up, just today I looked up and had to refresh my mind on some of the issues with euthanasia, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of good stuff here that I read, because I think all of us, when faced with some arguments, need that a little extra studying. When we get hit with some of the hard cases, we have to have our arguments in line. So just coincidentally last week, we have blogs every week which are free. We do have free things on the website, and a writer named Nicholas Frankovich has an article called Suicide Acceptance, Abortion Acceptance. He said Americans are committing suicide at an increasing rate, but not only Americans. Suicide across the globe is on the rise. Note that suicide prevention, the national response to this trend, is on a collision course with creeping social acceptance of suicide as a rational exercise of the right to die. It's the psychological, though not yet legal, foundation of abortion rights. As pro-choice advocates have been telling us for decades, of course we care about the unborn child. What if it's not in his interest to live? Suicide acceptance has always been at the heart of the campaign to promote acceptance of abortion. The pro-life movement needs to respond to the current suicide crisis head-on, and to treat it not as an add-on to some seamless garment agenda, but as the central issue, the defining issue of the larger cause. So this is something that this author, Nicholas, has written about in the review, and he's really making a plea to pro-lifers to look at the suicide issue as just as important as the abortion issue, as it is intrinsically connected. And certainly in the very first issue of the Human Life Review in 1975, my dad wrote in the introduction that this journal would be to talk about abortion and related issues such as euthanasia. So in New York City, we have a new threat, which is called the Medical Aid in Dying Law. And after Cuomo's horrific celebration of the RHA, he gave the proponents of such a law a great gift, because just recently, in April, in a radio interview, he said he would support this medical aid in dying law. And he said, I'd say pass the bill. It's a controversial issue, it's a difficult issue. The older we get and the better medicine gets, the more we've seen people suffer for too long. I think it's a situation that we have to address, definitely. So let's just unpack this for a minute, though. The older we get, yes, we are all living longer and healthier lives. And he says, and the better medicine gets. Well, yes, actually medicine is getting better, including palliative care and pain control, but we have to be able to find those care. But the point is, those things don't support his argument for medical aid in dying. What it supports is the unfortunate truth, which is that we are living longer and using more medicine, so it's more expensive. And so that is unfortunately at the heart of a lot of these legislations, that it would be a lot more expensive to keep us alive than to give us a prescription. What's really worse, though, is unlike his radical abortion policies, which are not supported by the majority of New Yorkers or Americans, polls show that most New Yorkers do agree with this Medical Aid in Dying Act. But that's because of how it is presented, as opposed to how it will actually work. And this is where all of us here need to be educated and talk to people around us. Because as the pastor said, you know, I remember talking to some anti-euthanasia activists a while ago. The people who have been pushing these laws have been working for many years, and they will talk to one person in an audience. You know, sometimes we get depressed if we don't have a lot of people listening to us, but the Right to Die people for years and years have been talking to small groups. They go to retirement homes, they write letters to the editor in small. They don't care how small it is, because they know that if they keep at it, they will succeed, and that's what's happening. So the activists use, as they do with abortion, a hard case that tugs at your heart. Someone who is terminally ill, someone who is in intractable pain and wants to be able to die with dignity. But what they want is for doctors to legally be able to kill patients. Is this a good idea? Sure, they talk about safeguards. But here's the first thing that I think of. The safeguards all depend on the goodness of people, the goodness of doctors, the honesty of doctors, the goodness of families. Yes, there are good doctors and good people, but let's face it, there's a lot of bad people and bad doctors, and most of us are somewhere in between. There are also depressed people who want a way out, but given the chance to recover, would cherish every day of life that they have. So Ed McFadden, who's Director of Public Policy at the New York Archdiocese, testified against this legislation actually a year ago tomorrow, May 4th, 2018, and I just have some of his basic points. Number one, assisted suicide is fundamentally different from accepted medical practices. Yes, we have always had palliative care, palliative sedation. Sometimes if someone is very ill, the sedation may hasten their death, but the intent was not to hasten their death, but to help with their pain. And there can be the withdrawal of excessively burdensome treatments. I see Great Father here. Even the Catholic Church acknowledges that some treatments are extraordinary and not required. So what's different about assisted suicide, again, is that these are not passive decisions. This is an active decision of a doctor who's making a plan to either kill someone or help someone to kill themselves. So it's a reversal of what doctors are supposed to be doing. Second point, legalization will hurt efforts to prevent suicides. Absolutely. This legislation, McFadden says, is being proposed as if it will only affect individual patients, and it has nothing to do with suicide in general. Nothing could be further from the truth. This bill contradicts and undermines current legal and policy efforts to safeguard vulnerable people from suicide. Ironically, within days of Governor Cuomo's comments supporting this medical aid in dying law, his press office touted the report of his New York State Suicide Prevention Task Force. He created a task force about suicide in 2017, and they presented this report, huge report, Communities for a Suicide-Free New York. Now, in this report, they talk about certain segments of the population who are most at risk for suicide. LGBT individuals, transgender individuals, Latina adolescents, Latino adolescents, and veterans. So part of this law is to pass some pro-transgender laws, of course, but there is a huge problem in suicide in our country right now, as we know, among white men, among teenagers, which I just read has gone up since that program, 13 Reasons Why. And I just happened to be flipping channels last night, and there was a hearing Monday about the high rate of suicides among veterans, U.S. veterans. So as a country, we are appalled and heartbroken at the rate of suicide, and so is Cuomo apparently, and yet at the same time, we're trying to legalize assisted suicide. It makes no sense. If you are someone struggling with depression, it's very easy for you to say to yourself, well, I'm just as miserable as a terminally ill person, and I have every right to kill my life. And so these laws are contributing to this horrible suicide rate. Meckman also said that this bill would strip suicidal patients of existing legal protections, because under current law, persons at risk of harming themselves can be involuntarily committed for evaluation and treatment. This bill would prevent that. A patient who requests, this is the bill, a patient who requests medication under this article shall not, because of that request, be considered to be a person who is suicidal. So talk about doublespeak. I want to commit suicide, but I'm not allowed to be called suicidal. And obviously states that have legalized assisted suicide have also seen an increase in suicide in general. That is no surprise. 3, physician-assisted suicide cannot be limited. It will inevitably lead to an expansion and to euthanasia. We know this is true. We don't like to look at facts. If we look at the countries that have gone down this path, the Netherlands, Belgium, and now Canada, there's not only euthanasia, there's involuntary euthanasia, children are at risk, and families in Holland have patients euthanized where they don't even know, they get a phone call.
What do you mean by that? You get a phone call?
Well, there's Alex Schadenberg from Canada, Euthanasia Prevention. I watched a movie where there was a woman interviewed from Holland. Her mother was, I believe she was in the hospital with breast cancer, and she actually got a call that her mother had been euthanized, that the doc, I know. So, number 4, there are inadequate safeguards to protect vulnerable patients. Absolutely. There is no mandatory referral of the patient to determine if they are suffering from a treatable mental illness that led to the suicide request. And certainly, studies have shown that when people receive a terminal diagnosis, they are often depressed. And yet, if the depression, I mean, we would all be, but you know what? We're all terminal, right? It's a matter of degrees. Once the initial shock of the diagnosis is over, it has been found that the terminally ill actually have, some of them have terrifically fulfilling lives. Haven't you heard people say, getting cancer changed my life and made me appreciate every day? So this kind of philosophy will cheat people of the rest of their time. And number 5, this bill actually requires, and I think this is the same in New Jersey that was just passed, that the physician lie on the death certificate to say the cause of death was the underlying terminal illness or condition of the patient instead of an actual suicide.
Is it insurance? Life insurance?
Right, because there are also laws dealing with that, or bills. And so obviously for a religious person, most of us probably are, life is not ours to take. Suffering has meaning, it has terrific meaning in the Christian religion, of course. But even for the non-religious, this is the only life we have. So I think both with abortion and suicide, these are irrevocable choices you can never take back. But the cultural zeitgeist is make the choice easy. Why would you make an easy choice that you can never take back? And Cuomo, who likes to quote Pope Francis when he's talking about capital punishment, which he's against, doesn't talk about Pope Francis when he talks about abortion and euthanasia, but the Holy Father says that true compassion does not marginalize, humiliate, or exclude, much less celebrate a patient passing away. Growing acceptance of euthanasia does not indicate increased compassion, but highlights the rise of, as he calls, the selfish throwaway culture that casts aside the sick, the dying, and those who do not satisfy the perceived requirements of a healthy life. So at the Human Life Review, I'll just give you a little snippets. Of course, we have been talking about this for many, many years. In 1991, Rita Marker, who's head of, it's called the Patients' Right Council, she's a hero. She has been fighting assisted suicide and euthanasia for many years. She wrote about Derek Humphrey, who was one of the first euthanasia advocates. He had a group called the Hemlock Society. Well, the group that you will hear about from Cuomo called Compassion and Choices, that's the Hemlock Society. It's just a new name. Compassion and Choices is basically the Planned Parenthood for euthanasia and assisted suicide. But what Derek Humphrey wrote in his book Final Exit was, this tells you how, where, and when to kill yourself or someone else. It breaks the last taboo. Follow my instructions for a perfect death with no mess, no autopsy, no post-mortem. This is the final guide. And Marker writes that the traditional prescription against euthanasia was no arbitrary taboo. It was a barricade which served to save us from barbarism. For centuries, the line between healing and killing was set forth as the one over which the physician must not cross. Sadly, personally, my nephew took his own life a couple of years ago at age 26, and he actually had found similar instructions online and followed them to a T. So, yeah, and it, obviously he was severely depressed. He had his whole life to look forward to, and because all this stuff is out there, he was able to find a method and a place, and they tell you, go somewhere where they won't find you, and it took them a few days to find his parked car where he had used one of these methods.
Wow.
So, yeah. And then as in New York, as Ed Meckman points out, when we try to fight these bills, one of our real allies in the fight, and a group that's not necessarily pro-life as a group, is the disability community. One group in particular, they're called Not Dead Yet, and they have a lot of good information online about why they oppose assisted suicide, because it's really a deadly form of discrimination against the disabled. When you think about it, a terminally ill person will become disabled in some way. They will lose the ability to walk or swallow or eat, and so then they will become disabled, and then what this law is saying is that they should be able to kill themselves with the aid of a doctor, which means that actually people who can't walk or who can't swallow, who aren't terminally, that their lives aren't worth living, which just brings us right back to Nazi Germany. What they say is we don't need to die to have dignity. In a society that prizes physical ability and stigmatizes impairments, it's no surprise that previously able-bodied people may tend to equate disability with loss of dignity. This reflects the prevalent but insulting societal judgment that people who deal with incontinence and other losses in bodily function are lacking dignity. People with disabilities are concerned that these psychosocial disability-related factors have become widely accepted as sufficient justification for assisted suicide. And this brings us back to New York. In both abortion up to birth and beyond, as we have now with the infanticide, and in assisted suicide, the rationale are disabilities, and you will have like these pro-abortion groups like Lady Parts Justice saying, that's ridiculous. The only time there are these late-time abortions are in these really tragic cases. Well, why is that? Because all people are actually good and they would only do that in age so-and-so? No. Right now there is nothing in the law that prevents anybody from aborting up to birth or letting a baby who died after birth. So who's to judge what so-called disability It could be cleft palate, it could be nothing,
That's right.
okay? PBMI,
What's disabled?
what's disabled? We all
They
have
can't tell me
abilities
themselves.
and disabilities. I mean, I wear glasses, that's a disability. I can't see that far. Another author that we had called Mark Moster wrote that, he calls it death making. This is what he says they say, okay, the death making lobby. Your medical and support care costs too much. By virtue of your disability, you have a poor quality of life. You suffer many indignities and struggles that leave you feeling worthless or a burden on others. You are largely invisible to the rest of society. You suffer a great deal physically, psychologically, in how your life is playing out. We can help you end your misery at a time of your choosing and in a comfortable, dignified way. So, this is absolutely eugenic euthanasia.
Yes.
So, what do? Okay, we have to let people know that they should be afraid because unfortunately, or it's just human nature, if you really want people to wake up to certain things, they have to feel threatened for their own well-being. And so, where people are afraid that they might be sick and suffering, people are afraid of suffering, we have to make them afraid of being killed off, without their say. And sometimes with the pro-life community, it's actually hard to get this message across. So in 2007, we have a Great Defender of Life dinner every year. We honored Rita Marker, head of euthanasia, anti-euthanasia task force. She told a story that actually shocked our audience of pro-lifers in New York. And this was a story that was in the news about a woman named Barbara Wagner in Oregon. This was soon after Oregon had legalized assisted suicide. So Barbara had cancer, it was in remission. When she went back to the doctor, she got bad news that the cancer was back. But then she got good news that there was a new treatment that would slow the cancer and keep her comfortable. And she wasn't worried about getting it because she was covered under the Oregon Health Plan. But then, a few days later, she got a letter saying that Oregon Health Plan would not pay for this treatment, but would pay for her assisted suicide. When the story hit the newspapers and the TV stations, they said it was an isolated incident. But then another man, Randy Stroke, with prostate cancer, said he received a letter like that too, and so did many other people. So if anyone thinks that this will not affect each and every one of us with the kind of health care coverage we have, and now more and more states, we should think again. Is this what will happen in New York? We hope not, but we have to fight Governor Cuomo's death wishes on us. Amen.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, and Maria's going to leave some issues of the Human Life Review. And we want to thank her again for the offer of the one-year digital subscription for free for your attendance here. Thank you, Maria.